Warning. The following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of this show that you have found somehow, because when you type in Billy Business, it's not the first thing that pops up, but you alone have the power to change that. You can go right now, rate, review, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and it'll bump it up the line. And I'm going to knock down that economics podcast.
You're doomed.
If it's the last thing I do.
Coming for you.
What is there? Stocks are not an evergreen topic, all right? The market is in flux. But movies like today, we can talk about these for forever, because this movie came out in 1990. We are talking about The Godfather Part 3 and talking about it from Rey Nation. Cameron Rice, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, this was one I was just saying, I'm fairly confident not a lot of people have seen this, even though they say it's terrible. But Godfather 3 has been in the news recently because, tangentially, because Martin Scorsese saying, not a big fan of Marvel movies. I get it. Francis Ford Coppola came in and said, I will see you're not liking them and raise you they are despicable. And it was just astonishing, because the first thing that I saw most people say on those types of threads were, oh yes, as the guy who made Godfather Part 3. And I was like, if I were just any old filmmaker, if I could make anything close to a Godfather Part 3, I'd say I was a pretty good filmmaker.
Yeah, pretty decent. Pretty good. Yeah. Man, I got a whole lot of thoughts about the Scorsese Coppola kerfuff, as it were. Generally, I'm in the opinion, I'm just like, I don't care.
Yeah, same.
Just like, man, I don't know, like, to me, it's interesting to hear those perspectives, because they've made so many movies that I love, and so many things, and I like hearing artists talk about other art. I think we're in this interesting space where fandom and geeks have won, and we want everyone to agree with us.
Yeah.
And I tried to I've pointed out to some people, I was like, man, I promise you, a lot of your favorite artists who you feel are artists, not just like, I'm putting out product, but like artists, musicians, authors, anything like that. You read enough of the interviews, they will on other people.
Right.
Stephen King had a column in Entertainment Weekly that ran every week. He had no problem on Dean Koontz and James Patterson.
He's just a one-man war on all the airport novel writers.
He had no problem. Like, that's my thing, is like, and you read like enough, like, I like punk rock music. There's enough like interviews with punk rock musicians who are just like, this other person sucks. What they make is trash. And have you ever read Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, the Peter Biskin book?
Yeah.
That book is full of those guys on each other.
Right.
William Friedkin's like, the conversation is a boring movie.
I mean, it's always the next generation hates the last generation hates the next generation stuff. Godfather Part 3 is one where I feel like it was an easy target.
Is an easy target, because also I feel like a lot of times people, they do those jump to things, and I feel like it's that funny thing of like, I'm like, I think you don't watch enough movies. Like, you probably haven't seen The Godfather 3. And listen, Francis Ford Coppola is on a pedestal. He's made some great stuff. I don't know if you've seen the movies he's made in the last 10 years. He hasn't made too many.
Right. Some interesting choices.
I'm glad he's making those choices. There was one with, I can't remember the name of the film off the top of my head, but it's Val Kilmer and Elle Fanning. And there is some CG green screening that is rough. It is real rough.
I don't think anyone thinks of ILM, Weta, and you're like, yeah, Ford Coppola. Those Godfather movies are...
My point being is, I'm like, I think people could go after other films in his filmography. Sure. You wouldn't have heard of them, but you could go after other movies.
So this one is interesting because you just said, like, true artists and going after the art. And, there's one, a reason why I say that Godfather Part 3 is an easy target is, giving a little context, this is the epitome of quote unquote selling out, of quote unquote milking it. This is truly the business end of the product. Coppola has gone on record in the audio commentary for those Blu-rays, which are fantastic, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Coppola said the first two films, That was his story.
That was it.
He did a boo-boo though. He did call a movie called One from the Heart, where it was one from the fart. It did terrible. It lost a ton of money, and Paramount was like, "Hey, we need that third Godfather now."
Yeah, he kind of one-two'd it, where it's like Apocalypse Now drove him insane. If no one's ever seen Hearts of Darkness, the documentary,
arguably more interesting than even Apocalypse Now.
And I love Apocalypse Now,
yeah.
but yeah, that documentary is like, holy crap. But he follows that up with like, I really like the two S.E. Hinton adaptations that he does, The Outsiders and Rumblefish. Didn't really light up the world. The cast loaded up the world. That kind of started the whole Brat Pack grouping.
And I would say Outsiders has grown kind of in cult status.
I
as the
agree.
years go
Yeah,
by,
like there's been new editions where it's like the complete novel edition.
Right.
But as far as box office, it wasn't the biggest films in the world. He then does the 1-2 of One from the Heart. One from the Heart's the big one, and also The Cotton Club. And both of those do not do well. And then he also does a film called New York Stories. It's him, Scorsese, and Woody Allen. And I think his part of that is a lot of people's like, oh, it's real bad. So he was in a rough spot.
Yeah, so he comes in, he does Godfather Part 3. He gets everyone back except there's a key member of the cast who does not come back, which is Robert Duvall, who plays Tom Hagen. And Coppola, I think that's not his one, but a big regret of this movie was just, it doesn't feel the same without Tom Hagen. He has said it, there's a new consigliere, but all they wanted, he was like, look, you don't have to pay me Pacino money, but you can't pay me like 5 times less than Pacino money.
Yeah, Duvall has gone on, he's recently too, like I think recent being like in the last 10 years, but like still, Duvall was asked like, oh, do you regret it? And he was like, no.
Why would you? The one that universally no one likes.
Yeah, that everyone, he gets like way more money to do this movie, and Duvall was offered like, it sounds like just not nearly enough, and it was just like, no, I'm not going to do it. So that I would agree. So I think, yeah, talking about the movie as a movie, how do you feel about the movie?
I think, honestly, Coppola said, he's like, look, the story of Michael is the first 2 movies. This movie is an epilogue.
Yes.
And when I see it like that, it totally makes sense, and I like it in that sense, because it's like, yeah, if as Godfather Part 3, it has nothing to, like, there's no way it can live up to Godfather. But as like, hey, here's like the last 10 pages of this huge book that you just read. I feel like I really like wrapping up Michael's story, because I understand like the kind of the nihilism and cynicism of the ending of Godfather 2. But to see it come full circle, I don't know. I like that. I needed that.
Yeah, so originally he did not want to call it Godfather 3. He wanted to call the movie The Death of Michael Corleone.
Right.
Him and Puzo, writing the script, they called it The Death of Michael Corleone because, he was like, the Godfather story's over. We did it. We told the arc. We told the entire arc. And so, that's supposed to be an epilogue, different title, and Paramount. And he's talked about that on the audio commentary. He's like, it very much shows how much influence I still had that I did not win that battle. He's like, I didn't win a lot of the battles. Whereas, so part one, for those who don't know, because I think that's the interesting thing, we talked about like how many people have actually seen Godfather 3. It's both surprising and not surprising how many people I know who are film people who have not seen any of them.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Godfather is like this, it's in those top 5 that you must watch, but it can be a little daunting. They're long run times. It's almost just like when you watch it too for the first time, it's like you actually like through Simpsons or Family Guy or really any pop culture thing, like so many of those beats already.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it can feel like homework for some people because of the length.
Sure.
I think if they were all like an hour and 2, like 2 hours long, people would digest them more. But I think if you really sit there with those Godfather films, so I just rewatched the entire trilogy leading up to this, and it was so rewarding and so nice. And it's one of those films where it's like, it just I've said on Twitter, it's like a warm hug. It's just
right.
Like
well, I mean, literally, like
hug.
It's just like a warm kind of sepia almost kind of aesthetic to it.
Yeah, the way Gordon Willis lit it, he talked about, because everyone talks about how dark the Godfather films are, not just like in tone, but like visually.
Right.
And like Gordon Willis got a lot of crap for it, but what was great was it also played against all the scenes that were memory or taking place in Italy or at the wedding are all very yellow tone and kind of made to feel like a 1950s photo.
Right.
And stuff like that. And I think it's easy for people to, if they don't know, not think that these really were like big mainstream at the time popcorn movies.
Right.
Like those first two films, 3 hours long, they move like 3 hours.
I would say
go
one
by.
moves incredibly fluid. I don't fall in the camp of I don't think Godfather 2 is better than 1. I still think 1 is borderline a perfect movie.
Yeah.
I say on this podcast almost every time, I don't think any movie is 100% perfect or 100% terrible, with few exceptions. And that I think Godfather 1 might be one of those exceptions. I think that is perfectly paced. I think every beat hits. For me, Godfather 2 takes a little bit more time. I still think it's as close to perfect as you can get.
Every scene with De Niro is so, as young Vito is so
fantastic.
good. That Pacino plays that whole thing like with a simmering anger. I love everything with Robert Duvall. So when you then get into 3, so for me, 3, I like 3 a lot. And there's some scenes I love that I think are really, really great. And I think the biggest issues with 3 is there's some elephants in the room that I think are worth addressing. But
Sure, let's get into it.
Tom Hagen not being there is a big thing.
Yeah.
Especially considering this series is so much about honor and family and trust. So the fact that you have a new consigliere that if Robert Duvall couldn't be there, I'm like, why not make it Tom Hagen Jr.? You're literally introducing that he has a son,
right?
And you make him a priest, and the character's barely in the film. I'm like, I would be more willing to accept that than like, here is a completely new character with a different last name,
right?
Who is not tied to the family whatsoever, except apparently maybe in the last like 20 years at some point from Michael. And it's just so hard because like Tom Hagen is like, they talk about him as like the 4th non-blood brother.
Right.
That's like, he grew up with them as a kid and all this other stuff. So having like this new consigliere there that Michael's supposed to kind of confide in, that has like no ties to the family whatsoever and is a new character for the film, hurts. I think you are kind of like, because that hurts some of the Godfather-y stuff within it.
It does. Devil's advocate. It does also, like, I kind of like this idea that, you know, the one thing that Godfather 3, why it does feel so different is because 1 and 2 take place relatively close to each other. I would say like less than a year goes by before Godfather 2. This one does give us a lengthy time jump.
Yes.
And I do think that the character of Tom Hagen was, in a weird way, like kind of the somewhat twisted conscience of Michael.
Yeah.
And so to have him not be there, I don't know, it does make Michael's growth a little bit more apparent. The fact that someone's not telling him, you know, that's not guiding him. He doesn't have those guides. We have to infer that Michael is now at a point in his life where he's kind of made these mistakes and realized them on his own. I get it. It still hurts to not have Tom there because that character is so great. But I do also think like it's realistic in the sense of like, yeah, people come, people go, things change. A lot has changed with Michael in those 20 some odd years or 30 years since.
Well, the big thing a couple of talked about this was like cutting his hair, making his hair that gray,
right?
Which
and
I like.
A little spiky almost.
I kind of like that. He said he wanted to show that all the rot that was on his soul is now on him. So it's like his hair, his like beautiful hair has gone away.
Right.
And it's like his face is weathered and all this other stuff. And I'm like, go, I love all that visual representation stuff. The other thing, and probably the biggest thing, is Sofia Coppola.
There's no getting around.
Yeah. And, you know, talk about lightning rods in films. I feel like sometimes people will hit upon something and go, well, that's the one thing. If you took that out or changed that, I call it the Jar Jar Binks. As people act like, if Jar Jar Binks was in episode 1 would be great. And I'm like, well, the movie's got a lot more issues, but people hit on Jar Jar as like, that's the main thing. And I'm like, he's a larger symptom of an issue and that we can dive into.
Right.
But people will go, oh, Sofia Coppola, if you just recast him. And I'm like, So rewatching it to me, so her is her, it's very rough. The main scene that stood out to me is the first time it's just her and Michael. This is not at the party or anything. And she's like, she delivers lines very flatly, where it's just, Dad, Anthony says I'm a cover for your business. Is that true?
Dad.
And and man, it's so hard. And the thing is, like, the rumor was, not even rumor actually, I think it was supposed to be Winona Ryder.
Yeah.
She dropped out at the last minute, and then there was this kind of search for another actress.
Julia Roberts was on the table at one point. They had another actress whose name escapes me, and she like passed away before they could even get that far. So yeah, where just like Italians, just like the Corleones, who do you turn to? You turn to your family.
And again, like this being that he had no sway like he did in part 2, from all accounts, like Paramount was like, no, you got your start date's your start date. Figure it out. It's like, oh, my daughter.
They had to hit those Christmas, man, for those, that award season kind of thing.
Yeah. That said, this is the first time on this rewatch. I think I've seen Godfather like probably 5 or 6 times at this point. Like I've seen
more
than
me, yeah,
way more. This is the first time watching it. I'm like, oh, you know what? I don't know if I think it's the storyline as well. I don't know if a better actress would have made this work.
Yeah, look, it's a thankless role in that sense.
Yes.
I definitely think. Look, we've all seen bad movies where, look, to bring you full circle, Phantom Menace. Look, I'm in the camp that actually really likes Phantom Menace and likes the prequels, but the dialogue is terrible, and George Lucas is known for terrible dialogue. But here comes Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor, and they somehow rise above the material that they're given. Whereas, like, I'm sorry, Hayden Christensen and even kind of Natalie Portman are like, I don't know what to do with this.
They're pretty stiff, and I think, and that's the thing where it's like, but at least the storyline with that of like the story of like Anakin and Padme discovering, each other and all this other stuff, and we can't do it, the star-crossed lovers that shouldn't be. That's an interesting storyline. I think the issue with Godfather 3's Mary storyline is, so the whole thing that people loved about the first 2 Godfathers is that people are like, oh, I felt like I was seeing my family. There had already been gangster movies and Italian gangster films and all this other stuff. People are like, oh, I felt like it was my family, because there's like little kids running around in scenes, and there's these little
They made them people. Real people.
They made them people.
Yeah.
The fact that the Mary storyline is like, it's kissing cousins, and
a little strange.
Everyone in the family seems to be fine with it. Everyone's issue seems to be, Vincent's in the business. You're going to hurt Mary. Nobody seems to be going like, this is Oogie. And again, after 2 straight films of like, this is the most identifiable, this is my family, this is my thing, having a kissing cousins thing, which from my understanding is like very much in a lot of Puzo's work in his novels, is like this incestual kind of stuff. And I understand that's like a lot of that's in opera and things of that nature. And I get having it in there, but again, you have given me 2 films of like very human, very identifiable, that's how my family is, to an entire family going like, hey, you probably shouldn't date your cousin. Not because of the cousin thing, but because he's in the mob.
Yeah, just because he's kind of a bad guy. Also, your kids will come out a little weird.
It's the storyline. Like, so I don't even know if you had like Winona Ryder or Julia Roberts or any actress who was like a killer actress. I don't know if it'd work, because I think there'd still be this layer of like, I don't buy this.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's like, the scene that actually sticks out for me the most is the scene that they want to hit you the hardest, which is at the end where she gets shot and she falls over. And this, I'm not going to blame her entirely, because this was actually...
No, I don't blame her entirely.
This was a thing that they did a lot in like 90s movies, where someone gets shot and they're just looking at you and they don't realize they're shot, and they look down and they touch their stomach and they're like, oh God, and they fall over dead. It's like, you know you're shot when you're shot.
Yeah.
Like, you're dead. And she dies almost as bad as Marion Cotillard in Dark Knight Rises. Not quite as bad, but those two are neck and neck with just like, Dad, I'm dead.
It's close.
It's pretty bad.
But I think Pacino in that scene is awesome.
Right. He definitely comes in and overshadows like the terrible performance.
And again, so this is again the first time, and this has nothing to do with Sofia Coppola. This has to do with the storyline of Mary. This is the first time watching this. I'm like, because I get the tragedy of like, oh, this man has lost his daughter and the father-daughter dynamic, blah, blah. This is the first time watching it. I'm like, I kind of wonder if it should have been Anthony that gets shot.
Anthony certainly, in hindsight, is the one that has...
Him and Kay fight over him.
Right,
Him and Kay is like, Kay's like, you got to let him go, let him his own life. They go to his opera. It's this whole thing. I'm kind of sitting there going like, would this have been more powerful? Because like, truly, outside of that, Mary is into Vincent. I couldn't tell you a lot about Mary. even within that whole 3-hour movie.
Sure.
I could tell you, I think, a fair amount about Anthony and
Right.
being like, I don't want to be a part of your life. I know what you did to Uncle Fredo. I remember this, that, and the other, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I kind of wonder if it would have been more powerful if it was Anthony.
I mean, I think you just said yes. Because I also, too, it's like, you know, he is essentially right now in the Michael Corleone position that Michael was in at the beginning. Godfather 1 is my family. I love them, but I'm not them. And here comes his son, Anthony. And if Anthony was taken away, it's almost like a trade. It's like, all right, you get to keep your life, but we're taking away.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, very much a mirror. Whereas you're right. Mary's not a mirror to Michael. She's just, sadly, just wrong place, wrong time.
Wrong place, wrong time. And I think it's the thing of like, it's that, I don't know how to put it, but it's that storyline thing of like, oh, my daughter, my angel, my little princess, this, that, the other, and that kind of thing. And I get it. It makes for like a really kind of interesting, fun little motif. I do like the scene where it's like, where he's holding her and then it's the 3 different dances
Right, yeah.
melded together. I was like, oh, I love that. But there's a part of me like, I kind of wonder if this would have been more powerful if it was Anthony. Because then I think the biggest issue for me, because of the whole Mary thing, not the death, but is that Godfather 3 is the only one for me that has a storyline in it that I'm just like, kind of let's get past this, because everything with Pacino and the Vatican stuff and everything like that, I was in. I'm in. I find that interesting. And then we got to go spend 10 minutes with this flirting Andy Garcia. And I like Andy Garcia, but I was just like,
I was going to say, I think Andy Garcia, like, knocks it
Yeah.
way out of the park.
Yeah, I think he's
that
great.
scene where those 2 guys break in and the knife to the girl's throat.
Look at me.
Yeah, look at me. Like he's like, I don't know her. I don't care. Do it. Go ahead. You
Yeah.
know, like he's so. Who sent you? Just tell me who sent you. Boom. You know, like
Yep.
I think Andy Garcia. By the way, Cuban descent, playing an amazing Italian,
Which
You
works,
never know.
considering that James Caan, also not Italian.
Sure,
So he's
yeah.
James Caan's son.
I think he really cemented himself as, you know, a star in this role.
Yeah.
And I actually would have loved to have seen a sort of spinoff with his character. I don't know if it was ever in the works, but I definitely would have seen.
I don't know I've tried to kind of see if there's anything. Was there ever talk of like a 4 with him? And I don't know. I feel like probably not for Coppola. I feel like for Coppola it was like
That was-
I
yeah.
wrapped it up with Michael.
Right.
But those, I think, to me, those are the 2 major things that stand out. It really is like the not having Tom Hagen, and the Mary storyline doesn't work. Because again, like for me, every storyline in Godfather and Godfather 2, I'm invested in.
Sure. Right.
And a lot of screen time is taken up by this, like the kissing cousins that everyone's just like, that's fine. He's just, I wish he wasn't in the mob. Otherwise, I would be fine with this.
You know what? This predated Game of Thrones. Maybe in today's world, we'd all just be like, oh, it's like Daenerys and Jon Snow.
If only. But everything else in this movie, it either like really works for me, or I'm like, oh, that's great. It's like, I love Diane Keaton in this.
Yeah.
She got some I think that is an interesting thing. I think there are people who, when they watch Godfather now, that is their negative point, is Kay.
Yeah.
Kay doesn't feel like a character. She feels like she's a pawn that's kind of meant to be eyes through Michael's journey.
I could see that, but I also think, you know, especially if you're seeing Godfather 1 and 2 as one big continuous story, it is 100% necessary for her to feel dismissed
Yes.
in that first movie, because when she finally is just like, I had an abortion because you're a monster,
Yeah.
it hits so much harder, because you're like, look at where we started with her.
Yes.
And look at what she was driven to by the end of that one, you know?
Oh yeah, and so, but I love, she's got such great scenes and meat to play with in 3. I love that scene where he's like, "Oh, you hate me," and she's like, "I don't hate you, I
Right.
dread you." And like their whole like walk through Sicily and all these towns, and she's just like slightly disgusted by all this old stuff that she's seeing, that there was all this like honor and death and murder,
Right.
and she's like, ugh. I love Diane Keaton in this movie. I think Connie is great. I love her as this Lady
Now,
Macbeth type.
That is nepotism that worked in his favor, is
Oh.
putting Talia Shire.
I think if she had never done anything else and she was only in the Godfather movies, I think people would be like, man, but the fact that she's also Adrian makes a lot of people go, oh, she's actually like an actor.
But I love that, like, again, like, look back at that character in the first one, punching Michael hysterically at the end of part 1, coming around to
She's more ruthless than him.
Right. She's kind of, like, I think she was in fear of Michael so much that now, like, that she feels like she was in his good graces and part of, like, the system of the Corleone family. It's hard for her and for her son, Vincent, to kind of, like, I don't do that anymore, But I loved it. I love her character in this one. The cannoli thing at the end.
The cannoli thing with Eli Wallach. I love that Eli Wallach is in this. Right. He's great. It's this like old man who's like, I'm done. Just totally not done. But I love that. But yeah, Connie is great as this like Lady Macbeth type who's pushing Andy Garcia.
And that's why I say, like, I understand pushing it in the future, you're going to lose a couple characters, but also, like, Godfather Part 3 works so well because I don't think if you had a Godfather Part 3 and let's say it took place a couple years later after Godfather Part 2, or even if you didn't, like, a character like Connie now becomes like, oh yeah, I forgot she was in it. But because we're doing this, we get, like, Connie becomes this full fleshed out interesting person, like, wow, look at where you started to where you ended up. And I that's the thing that I think a lot of these characters, I've seen a lot of criticism of Michael in this movie where it's like, wait a second, this is not the Michael from Part 2. And it's like, yeah, absolutely. Because this is like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. It's like, of course it's not the same guy, No,
I'm of two minds of it. I think, like, I do love, like, I love the confession scene. The confession scene I think is so well done. And I love the way it's shot, like this weird, like, framing behind like these bushes kind of a thing. It's so interesting, but showing this like split between him and his priest. I love that confession scene. I think it's more the stuff that stands out to me, and it's not bad, but I think the stuff that makes me go, I don't know if that's Michael or that's Pacino. It's not the Pacino quotey lines. It's more the so as an example, near the beginning of the movie, when the singer comes back, he's gonna sing a song, and he's like, Michael, I'm gonna sing your favorite song, and Michael goes, I'm gonna go into the kitchen, I'm gonna listen to Tony Bennett records. And I love Pacino, and it's a very good line, but I'm like, Michael wasn't really jokey. Michael wasn't really like a sarcastic, jokey guy. That felt like a line that would have been in a Pacino movie in the 90s. Like, Pacino did a lot of that kind of like, here's my witty repartee.
Yeah,
I'm a funny guy.
It's it's really tough because it's hard to say, like, oh, it's Michael that's, going back to how he used to be. But we only got Michael in his kind of pure form before a tragedy for like less than half an hour in that first movie.
Right.
So it's like, it's because even when he's still kind of innocent and pure, his dad has just been attempted murder. So it's he's already in kind of like fight or flight mode. So yeah, who's to say one way or another? But I do think, like having the Godfather 3 even exist gives a lot of weight to the choices that the character made in the other movies. I think the reason that the death of Fredo feels so big is because now we know how much of a shadow that casts over the rest of his life.
Yes. And so I'm of two minds, like the sad Michael, all that stuff I love. And I don't even like hate the jokey stuff, but it is like little stuff that pings in my mind a little bit.
Feel
where I'm like, that feels like the lines he'd also have in Scent of a Woman.
No, I get it. Look, this is easily the worst comparison I will ever make on this show. When I started watching Fuller House, I was like, that's Bob Saget and John Stamos. That's not Danny and Jesse. Like that's just Bob Saget, like
I do want to see that on the poster though. Godfather 3, just like Fuller House. Take that as you will. But I do like the diabetic scene where he's having like a diabetic attack.
Sure, yeah.
And he starts screaming out for Fredo. That's the scene that gives us the one Pacinoism that I think, and I think that's the other thing too. I think like a lot of people kind of hit on Godfather 3 for the performance, and I think because people misremember because either they haven't seen it or they're misremembering. I think they think the whole movie is every time I'm out they pull me back. I think I'm out, they pull me back in.
Which a lot of people I don't think even realize that's from Part 3.
Yeah, and I think, but a lot of people I think this is a very like, oh, I'm big kind of Pacino movie,
right?
And it's not.
No,
that's like you have that. That's the one kind of Pacinoism, and it's not what I wanted. Like that's the other one where he blows up in the hospital. Other than that, and Vincent, would you shut up? But other than that, it still feels very like quiet and subdued, and it's very much like not like other Pacino roles we got after this, where it's like Sense of Woman is very big. Heat, and I love a lot of these movies, but like Heat, he's very big. Devil's Advocate, like these movies where he's like really playing it up and playing big.
But you also have to remember, like,
have that.
Those Pacinoisms all are from movies that came years after this one.
Yes.
So at the time that this movie came out,
mix it up.
Right, that there is no such thing as a Pacinoism at that point.
Yes, he'd only done at this point, because a lot of people forget, like, he really took the 80s off. If you look up Pacino in the 80s, I think it's like Cruising. He does like Revolution and Cruising, and then nothing until Scarface, which is 88. Like, he's pretty much out for all of the 80s.
And oof, boy, did he commit to Scarface.
And so
that's Pacino. That and Dunkachino from Jack and Jill are the two most Pacinoist Pacinos you can get.
So he like ends with Cruising, which is not a very like I'm big kind of a thing. It's still him kind of in his 70s. I'm quiet and kind of intense, and I might have one or two screaming parts. And then comes back with Scarface, does Godfather 3 in the middle, and then does all the big. So I think people mix Godfather 3 and like, well, it's not Michael. He's so big the whole movie. And it's like, no, he's not.
Right.
He's really not.
I really, truly, and it's funny because I think it was Gene Siskel who said in his review of this movie, which, by the way, Siskel and Ebert liked this movie better.
I watched their review a couple days ago. It's online.
They liked it better than the second one. But they did criticize the ending. Specifically, he was like, the old age makeup looks terrible. I'm like,
Siskel hated the makeup.
I'm like, I guess he wasn't around to see Guy Pearce in Prometheus. It's like, that is bad. But I love the parallel between Michael's death and Vito's death.
I do too.
I like that it's similar, but it's in, Vito is with, his legacy, right, is at home, and Michael has been kind of self-imposed exiled. He is alone. It's such a tragic story and a tragic ending for Michael that I think to the people who are just like, yeah, I'll watch Godfather 1 and 2, but there is no Godfather 2. I'm like, you're robbing yourself of such a great ending for that character.
I think a lot of people, I looked into a lot of this because I tend to like sad trilogy endings or sad movies. I'm a big sad movie guy. We did a segment on Rey Nation that was like, what's a movie you can only watch once? And maybe that was because the movie was very rough or difficult. Yeah. And it wasn't because you didn't like the movie.
No, it's the Requiem for Dreams type of movies.
I didn't have a movie like that. I literally racked my brain. The other three hosts were like, Requiem, this movie, that movie. And they were like, do you have one? I'm like, I like those movies. So it's like, I'm usually the guy who's showing those movies to other people.
Sure, yeah.
I like Alien 3. I'm someone that like enjoys the fact that Alien 3 is this like sad, depressing, depression, gothic walk to death. Where she's like, I'm alone and I'm bald. I don't know. I'm just going to throw myself in this pit of fire. And I'm like, yeah. So for Godfather 3, I get but American moviegoers don't like those kinds of movies. They don't like those films. That's why a lot of people have issues with The Last Jedi with Luke, is they're like, I don't want to see a sad old man. I want Luke to be the Luke from the extended universe where he goes into a town with a lightsaber and goes, what's your problem? And I'll take care of everything. And Godfather 3 falls into that. Like, this is not, despite the fact that Michael has this quiet intensity in 1 and 2, and he's ruining his life and his marriage and his family, there's still these like fun scenes where it's like Clemens is making pasta and all this. That's great. This is great. 3 does not really have that. 3 is just like a slow, sad walk with an old man who has made nothing but mistakes, despite the fact that he thinks he's not making mistakes.
It's like it's almost a tough watch in the sense that it's like this movie purely exists because it's time to pay the check. It's time to now finally come and get everything that's been coming to you.
Yes.
For the last 6 hours that we've been watching the history of your life. It's like, and now it's like the revenge of the Sith of Michael. Like, it's just, it's like, there's no way that this could end on a happy note. It just can't. He hasn't earned it.
He hasn't earned it. And it's also the fact that I would recommend this to anybody. If anybody's listening to this and they're like, oh, maybe I will, maybe I've never watched the trilogy. I'll watch the trilogy. We live in such a binge culture now. Totally all about watch 1 and 2 back to back. You'll have a great day. Let 2 sit with you and then come to this in a week.
Yeah.
I think trying to jump right into this, if you end 2 and go right into this, I think it'll feel a little funky.
I think 1 and 2 have such a rhythm and a cadence that is, like you said, it's not matched and it's not tried. They're not trying to match.
No. So whereas 1 and 2 has like this kind of grand epic view where it's like, oh, the family, the lineage, we're going to go back to Italy and we're going to find out who Vito was as a young man. And Michael went to Italy and he's been there a year, 2 years, who knows? And he goes back home. He's okay. I've been home a year. It's this grand tale. 3 is not that. Vito is only mentioned in name once.
Right.
This is not about the lineage and all this, despite the fact that Mary and Anthony are there, that there's Vincent, but there's more of like, this is more claustrophobic to some extent. Like,
no,
this might take place
definitely-
over maybe a month.
If that, yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird because it's not like they're not sprawling, like 1,000 different locations, but this does feel a lot more limited in scope. Even when we're going to Sicily and stuff, it doesn't feel the same as seeing a young Michael in exile in Italy in part 1.
Right.
But I do, I kind of appreciate that because it's like,
No, I do too.
like we need to wrap up Michael, and the fact that we're not being bogged down by his brother, we're not being bogged down by anything. It's like, yeah, like you're the last one standing, and this is, we focus on the characters that are his legacy, not the legacy that he's been a part of.
Yes. And I think the thing too is like, part 3 works as like a great dark mirror by having Michael be a similar age to what Vito was. Because
Right.
have you ever read Coppola's Godfather Diary, the book he released a couple years ago?
I've not, but I've heard that it's fascinating.
Oh, I love it. It's so good. It's basically, for those who don't know, Coppola, before he went into making the first film, basically took the novel and ripped out pages of the novel, put it in a notebook, and like scrolled through the novel, and then basically mapped out every scene for the film, and was basically like, here's the theme of this scene, here's the tone, here's the look, and then he had a section called Pitfalls, and it's like, what are the issues that I could hit with the scene? It's like cliches. Is this boring? Too much exposition? Da, da, da. It's a great book. And within that, he talks about also the characters. So it says like Vito is supposed to be like 55, 56. And that's essentially where Michael is in 3. So the idea that I think you need 3 to kind of have like that dark mirror where it's like Vito is, that movie opens and Vito is like surrounded by family and everyone's all about trying to see the Godfather, yes, to get favors, but also a big thing for him is you didn't come to me in friendship.
Right.
Just looking for things. You didn't come to me in friendship. Part 2 is all about favors. Ask people about me. I'll give favors. I'll remember. I have a mind for this stuff, this, that, and the other. Vito, despite the fact being a murderer and all these other things, and there's a degree of like, oh, he's a warm guy.
Right.
Everyone loves him. When he dies, it's this like thing. He dies, yeah, like we said, next to his grandson in this beautiful house that he had built off of his back, and all this other stuff. Michael, his whole journey is about like, I got to protect the family. It's for the family. I'm going to legitimize the family. And it's each step by step is the exact opposite of him ending up the exact opposite place where his father was.
Right.
So but his whole, I got to legitimize and protect the family. His brother gets killed. His daughter gets killed. His wife leaves him. He loses another son. There's all this like, he's pushing family aside, this and the other, even though he claims he keeps doing it for the family. And he dies alone in a backyard next to a little dog. And who knows how long it's going to take for someone to find him.
And I love too, like, you say like a dark mirror. It's like, well, yeah, in his mind, he's like, I got to protect the family. I got to, everything's for the family. But along the way, the decisions become, I got to protect myself. I've got to keep, myself satisfied. And I love that part 3, we start the Godfather Part 1 and it's Connie's wedding.
Yes.
And it's celebrating the legacy of my family, of, adding to my family. We start Godfather Part 3 and Michael is celebrating himself, like
he's getting a reward from the Catholic Church.
Right. It's a celebration of Michael, not about the family is a part of his celebration. And yeah, I love that it's just like, it's all culminating and like, it's all been about Michael. And now it's all going to get, you can't see, but I'm doing they suck me back in.
Yep, it's all
fingers.
about that.
Now, one thing I will say, that as much as I do really enjoy this movie, the one thing like it is, for me, incredible. I've seen this probably 3 or 4 times now. I'm still not 100% certain I understand what Immobiliare and all this Vatican Bank. I know it's based in reality.
Yes.
But it's just like, okay, sure. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, no, it is very confusing. I will say, like, all the stuff in part 1, I follow. It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Like, hey, Vito, do you want to deal with drugs? Nope. Oh, shouldn't have shot my dad. That's it. Part 2. Oh, I'm going to go into business in Cuba. Hyman Roth is going to get me there. Oh, Hyman Roth betrayed me.
Yeah.
It's a degree of like trying to legitimize the family more by like, he's completely out of the business.
Right.
Out of the crime business. And by getting the Vatican, helping them with their $600 million debt and paying it off, which by like, I did not get the feeling that Michael was a billionaire at the beginning of part 3. I get that he's very well off. I did not get he was $800 million well off because he gives 200 at the beginning and then offers 600 for this. I was like, I did not know this man was like, I had 3 casinos. Maybe he is.
Who knows? Yeah. I mean, also, yeah, because he's willing to not only pay, $600 million for Immobiliare, but also pay out the rest of those families. Like, I'll pay you out for the casinos.
Yeah.
So
right now.
Yeah, he's Bruce Wayne wealthy.
And so the Immobiliare thing is, I will help you with your debt, and then you enter my name, and then I will therefore have a fifth, I will own a fifth of the real estate now. I will become like real estate head of part of Immobiliare. And so that's sort of the idea. And to be able to do that, you have to get approval from the Vatican and all these different groups and all this other stuff. So it becomes about that, and he gets it by the end, but his daughter dies. So it's like whatever. So it's as if like it's helping legitimize himself, because this movie's so steeped in Catholicism too. And that's the other thing too about the 3 films. That's the interesting thing, is like, as much as people want to like talk about if this is good or not good, if they've actually seen it, when you hear about what some of the Godfather 3s could have been before Coppola came back, have you heard some of those ideas?
Like some CIA type adventures,
like stuff about like the Bay of Pigs, and trying to assassinate Fidel Castro, but Tony was the main character. Maybe Michael was only mentioned in name, and Tony was going to be a spy. And I'm just like, it basically sounds like French Connection 2, when Gene Hackman goes to Italy to try and kill the guy. And I'm just like, at that point, I mean, I don't know. At that point, I guess it would just be forgettable. It'd be called Godfather 3. But, I mean, maybe, who knows? I mean, who directs that movie? Maybe it's like people will be like, my God, I turned the Godfather series into a spy thriller. And it was really good.
Worked for Fast 5, man. You could change genres halfway through.
But I think it is interesting to talk about where this movie came out. And generally, the consensus was, from most critics, except Pauline Kael hated it. But most critics were like, it's good. It's not great. It's not part. Siskel and Ebert on their show were like, it's not part 1 and 2, and then they said, but so few films are.
Right.
And they said it's still so enjoyable and so rich. They loved everything with Diane Keaton. It still gets nominated for Best Picture. It gets nominated for a number of awards at the end of the year. So it's so funny that it is now widely considered like it's the easy go-to joke. It's the joke of like, oh, hey, have you ever seen the Godfather trilogy? Oh, did they make a part 3?
Yeah, or it's just like, every third movie in a trilogy is terrible. Godfather part 3,
and it's
just
so
like,
widely considered to be the truth. And is it lesser than the other 2? Yes. Are there things that don't work? Yes. As opposed to 1 and 2, where for the most part, everything just seems to hum and work.
Right.
However, I think there are still scenes that are great. There's a theme that's at play here. And I will, honestly, I think his commentaries are great, and his commentary on part 3 is amazing. I
mean, the fact that this is unashamedly a cash grab, there's certainly worse cash grabs out there,
And when you hear him talk about it, it's like, yes, it was a cash grab, and he's like, but we still tried, and I think succeeded for the most part. I think like at the end of the day, I think a lot of people kind of dismiss the movie again because it is like, again, one of the major storylines doesn't work at all, which is the Sophia Vincent stuff. It just doesn't work. So therefore, the tragedy at the end of the death of the daughters doesn't work, because you're like, well, I don't really care about that character.
Yeah, look, I didn't even think about it, but once you said like it should have been Anthony, it's like, oh man, what a bummer. That would have fixed at least so much of the ending.
Well, because I forgot how much of the middle of this movie is Kay starts to accept Michael back into her life because he lets Anthony go.
Right.
And there's so many times, like, it's said just enough times that she's like, I want to thank you again for letting Anthony live his life and this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, man, it all feels like it's building to...
Yeah, I don't know if they did it to, like, subvert, because maybe you thought it, like, if something was going to happen, it would be Anthony. Sure, there are definitely shortcomings. I truly do feel though, like if you just change the title of this movie,
Yeah, if you think about it, like not part of this whole
it shouldn't be
veto
part
and
3.
spawn
Yeah,
this whole thing. Yeah,
I don't have a better suggestion.
I'm fine with the death of Michael Corleone. It might have done worse. Because
Right.
again, I'm of the opinion that I think like generally American going audiences don't like sad, depressing films.
I mean, I think there's already a John Travolta Angel movie, but call it Michael. You know,
Didn't come out then. It wasn't out yet.
or you could do a Star Wars style and be like Michael, a Godfather story. You know?
Yeah.
Something. But Godfather Part 3 does. You know, some of these movies that we talk about in the show, it's like I kind of feel like they were kind of set up to fail. And I think when you put Part 3 on The Godfather, it creates these expectations, you know, and look, unless you're like Toy Story or, you know, Lord of the Rings, which was already one big story broken up into 3 parts already, it's kind of impossible to strike lightning twice, let alone thrice. You know?
agree. No, and I think that's the thing too, is like they basically were screwed before they even begun.
Right.
Because people come in with an expectation. People come in with an expectation of like, oh, this is going to be even if it's not a sprawling epic as far as locations, it's going to be emotionally a sprawling epic. And this one's pretty tight. It's pretty simple. And I think like when you're like, oh, well, okay, you know, and again, the fact that the first 2 films really do like the first one takes place over like 10 years overall total time.
Yeah, it's longer than I thought. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then part 2 is, I think all the stuff with Michael is probably like a couple months, but when you go back to all the veto stuff and
Right.
everything,
We're
there's still
spanning
this
generations.
sprawling.
Yeah.
And so it's like you have 2 films that are all about sprawling narratives, and then you get to part 3 and it's like this takes over 3 months. This cousin kissing cousin storyline and this very confusing Vatican storyline, but really it's all just about Michael shouldn't have killed Fredo. And you're like, that's not very sprawling.
No, and you know, maybe someone out there now could do a very good kind of fan edit almost, where it's like, I think if you, because this one also is for an epilogue, it is just as lengthy as the other one. I think it's
under 3 hours. It's 250. It's right.
It's
under 3
real
hours.
close, but I think you could easily cut this down to a really quick
Yeah.
for Godfather, like 2 hour solid, like goodbye Michael
Yeah.
type of movie, if that's what its intention was. And it seems like that was the intention.
General intention, yeah.
Yeah.
I do
But-
love all the Joey Zaza stuff, though. I love Joe Mantegna.
He's fantastic. And the ear biting thing,
Oh.
you know, like is
What do you think of the helicopter scene? That does seem to be another lightning bolt
okay.
for a lot of
So
people.
here's the thing. I like the concept, and I didn't strike me until I watched it again this time. But I was like, oh, they totally stole this in Star Trek Into Darkness. They just did Godfather 3 again at the captain's meeting here. I don't mind the concept. I don't. Dude, a lucky coat. Like, what are we doing here? These are
very superstitious people, to be fair.
Sure, but that's a little clown shoes. Like, the way it said, like, no, my jack.
It's not great.
It's
It's not great.
But I don't, on its face, I don't hate it.
No, I know a lot of people kind of look at it like I've read some stuff online where people are kind of like they feel like that's a bridge too far because all the other deaths that happen in the other 2 films are pretty like close quarter, maybe
Yeah,
in dark
but-
hallways, and people are like, this felt like a Bruce Willis thing, and I was like, I don't know. I think like if Vito Corleone had a helicopter.
I mean, I guess that's the thing. That's probably, again, that's why this movie, I think, throws people off, is because you have this, even if you, clearly we were not born or living in the 40s and 50s, but there's like a nostalgic feeling to those movies.
Right.
And then this one just bumps you up into an era that you understand, even if you weren't
It's
alive.
1969 at the opening.
I mean,
think?
yeah, it
Yeah.
feels like the 70s.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
and it's like there's TVs, and it looks not modern, but modern enough that it looks kind of like your grandma's house, and she never kind of refurbished or redecorated.
Right.
You know, so like the fact that you like a helicopter with an automatic in there, it can feel a little almost like anachronistic, even though it's not.
Yeah.
So I totally understand like the divide, and that's why I'm with you. Like give some space to those first two movies so you can feel the passage of time when you watch the third one. On its head, I don't mind that scene. I do think, though, there are some real just like, what are we doing here? Goofy. Yeah.
It's hard, too, because I think what makes a lot of the first two films work, and a lot of stuff in the third film, is I do love those little moments, those little things like Clemenza being like, any other movie, the Clemenza making pasta scene would have been cut. Would have been like, what's this have to do with the plot? You gotta get that out of here. Blah, blah.
Sure.
And I do love that the first two films have all these little moments, like when Joey Fontaine goes to talk to the Godfather and be like, oh, this movie producer, and these children come running in and Tom Hagen has to grab them and take them out. All those little moments. And I feel like the Milwaukee Coat was an attempt at like a little moment that you wouldn't see. And it
not
doesn't
appropriate
work.
time.
No, it didn't work.
when there are bullets, it's like clearly it's not lucky because you are in the middle of a shootout that you are losing. So
no. I think that's what that was an attempt at, and it didn't work.
I don't need humor in that scene. I don't need irony. I just need that scene.
I think it's the only death. Is it? I could be wrong, but I think it's the only death in the whole trilogy that has like a humorous bent.
I mean, there's take the cannoli,
which
leave
is a
the
funny
body.
line,
right? But the death itself is not funny.
Yeah.
And honestly, I would love to ask Coppola, like, is that intentionally like funny, or is it just like
they're superstitious,
or is he just that guy's just not a great actor, or it was supposed to kind of feel a little bit more like it's funny because he delivers it with no sense of urgency. He's just like a 3-year-old, like my lucky, but it's my lucky. Oh no.
Yeah.
Again,
I do love it is followed up by that guy who's like bleeding out his mouth, like, Zaza, you son of a bitch.
Yeah, I guess. Look,
I do like that.
It's a little silly, yes. It is, but again, I like that idea. Yeah, bringing the Godfather into a quote unquote modern age is an interesting concept because I do think if in the first two movies, if it were in the 70s, the 80s, you would get a little bit more of an escalated kind of response to some of these things. And you have to evolve and you have to do something different. If we're just going to keep doing the same, come from the back and choke them in the back seat of a car every movie, then there really is no point to a part 3,
Yeah. But no, general, I think it's good. I think people got to check it out if they haven't. And I think, again, if you watch part 1 and 2, give it a couple days and then go to 3. Watch both 1, 2 on a weekend. Wait till the next weekend for 3.
Have you seen or checked out? I think it was on HBO for a while where they did like the saga, and it was 1 and 2 cut together, and it's a little rearranged to fit chronologically.
I saw a version, not that version, because I know he did that recently, but there had been like some TV cuts back in the day, like maybe like 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, growing up, where it was like, oh, it's the Godfather in chronological order, which I think is an interesting experiment. I appreciate that he's never released it officially like that. Like, I guess it's official because it's on HBO, but he's never put out like a DVD.
Sure,
like Godfather, the chronological.
Right.
Because I think, to some extent, it's a very interesting experiment. I think it robs some of the more powerful moments that way.
Yeah.
Like, Godfather 2 ending with, it's not the ending, but like the final last scene of Michael sitting alone as everyone goes to meet Vito Corleone. And it's like, you kind of get the impression, because the way he lifts the cigarette and everything, you're kind of like, oh, he was always kind of this isolated guy.
Right.
It wasn't just that your dad got shot.
Right.
You were always maybe this guy. That scene doesn't have that if you're watching it in chronological order. He just seems like a weird loner. So I think there's a degree of like, there's some power that kind of gets taken away when it's done that way. I think that's a great way to watch it if you've already seen the series.
Yeah, just as kind of like an interesting kind of alternate cut there. But I definitely think, especially if you've committed already to 6 hours of Godfather between 1 and 2, like, you owe it to yourself to just see it through,
Yeah.
And again, I think it's a fitting ending for the character of Michael. Do you think that there ever will be a Godfather 4? Maybe not Coppola, but in some form and or fashion?
Man. I would say, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd say probably a better chance of a remake than a straight up 4. But honestly, with all the streaming services that are out now, it would not shock me to be like, Godfather 4 coming to Paramount Plus.
Paramount Plus.
Yeah.
All 6 subscribers will be very interested.
I truthfully, like, I think like a couple of years ago, I would have just said like, well, if you're gonna do it, you're gonna put it in theaters, and it's gonna be a remake.
Yeah.
You're gonna remake it in some fashion. You'll be like, oh, they got this hot young director who's an interesting choice, and here are the young stars, and blah blah blah. But now I'm like, I don't know. I could easily see, or like Netflix is like an announcement, Godfather the series. We're gonna do. It's a remake, but it's also going to be more, and it's a series of films.
I could see someone coming along and maybe doing a Godfather the series, telling a little bit closer to the novels, you know.
Which I wonder how that would go down with people. Because have you read the book?
I read the first Godfather. Actually, I should say, since I've been told online, I had it read to me on an Audible audio book. I don't know if I can claim that I myself have read
fine
it.
with it. But it's interesting. I kind of agree with Coppola that it does feel like kind of a... And Puzo's even talked about there. He's like, he was like, look, I was broke on gambling debts, so I just wrote a thing real quick, and it became that. It's not like an artful book,
Yeah, I did see... the Sicilian, which has I think it's Christopher Lambert as the
Christopher Lambert, and is it Michael Cimino?
It's Michael Cimino. This was pre, I believe, Heaven's Gate. Post?
No, I think it was because
Cimino, was it post Heaven's Gate?
Yeah, because Cimino does Littlefoot and Big Thunder Littlefoot with Clint Eastwood, Jeff Bridges, Deer Hunter, and because of Deer Hunter, he gets to do Heaven's Gate. And then because of Heaven's Gate, everyone's like, you get no budget.
This has been the Billy Business Schmodown. And your winner. Yeah, no, you're correct. I did see it. That is a terrible movie.
Man, post Heaven's Gate, Cimino is interesting. But have you seen Year of the Dragon?
No, I have not.
It's awesome. It's also very problematic, but it's awesome.
My point being is, like, I do think that there are other characters in this Godfather world that I just wonder if they would ever kind of exploit, like you said, on a streaming service, or maybe Godfather 3 truly is the end. And if that is, I'm totally fine with this being the end.
Yeah, I think for me, you'd have to give it, like, obvious. This is an obvious thing, but I think you'd have to give it to an interesting creator. Because if you'd asked me 6 years ago, what do you think about a Hannibal TV series? I would have been like, that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
It's great.
Sure.
Because Brian Fuller's a smart guy.
Right.
And understood how to, like, get into that show and be like, what if it's this kind of thing and Will Graham and Hannibal have this relationship? So if someone out there has, like, a take on, like, The Godfather and is like, oh, we respect Coppola's work, but we kind of want to see what if we did it like this and it's a TV series, you'd have my interest. My fear is that it would just be like, oh, it's from the people who did a CSI show, and I'd be like, I mean, cool, hey man, you gotta make a living, I get it, but
do you not want to see the Greg Berlanti Godfather?
Listen, they would be very immaculate outfits.
So yeah, Godfather Part 3, guys. Do me a favor. If you have to, if you don't, but if you feel like you need to jump into the Scorsese Coppola wars, please don't use Godfather Part 3 as ammo and think that is a legitimate, because it's even as a bad Godfather movie, there's still more skill here than a lot of movies that are out there.
Well, it's also the thing too. So to kind of just talk about that for a half second is like, to me. I mean, like, I told some friends, I'm like, man, I wish I had a friend like Coppola where it's like I could go out there and say some shit and someone's like, you know what? Yeah, and even more. Which is like, that's
I'll do you one better.
Yeah, I'll do you one better. My boy's right, and he was nice. But Scorsese's entire point, at the end of the day, two things. A, his point was mostly about how it's like theaters are just being like choked by one type of film.
Right.
And I mean, we live in LA. We could see pretty much anything. I can tell you right now, Burbank Theater, 1 screening of Parasite, 18 screenings of Joker.
Yeah.
And also, I think when Scorsese says Marvel, I don't think he means just Marvel. I don't think he's like running wild with Suicide Squad.
100%.
He's using Band-Aid. He means superhero films.
Right.
And at the end of the day, like, I don't think he's necessarily wrong. The fact that it's like, I have to like scrounge sometimes to be like, oh, this movie's out. Where's it playing? Oh, one theater. There's one showing at 8:00. okay, I got to make it down there, but this theater is also just, I don't know. It's also like people are choosing to be ignorant. Like I feel like people are forgetting, and I'm not an anti-Disney guy. I got Disney Plus. I like a lot of the stuff they're doing, but I feel like people are forgetting. Like it was only like when did Hateful Eight came out like 3 years ago. Do you remember this story?
2015, yeah.
That
And they were pushed out.
it was supposed to be in the Cinerama Dome, and Disney told the ArcLight, "Oh, if you don't show Star Wars, we're not going to give it to you at all.
Yeah.
Star Wars has to go in the ArcLight, in the Cinerama Dome." And Quentin Tarantino was like, "I made this movie in Cinerama. I made it for the Dome. I have a contract. I'm supposed to show it there." And Disney was like, "Well, if you want to not have Star Wars, I guess you could show it there." And that's the larger discussion. Whether or not Martin Scorsese likes Ant-Man.
Sure,
I
yeah.
don't give a shit. The larger discussion has to be that really one company is like really kind of going, our theaters are ours, and you're going to show what we want you to show. And that's not Warner Brothers or Joker or anything like that, but I think there is something to be said that, like, even like today I was having a discussion with some people, and people were like, "Oh, should I go see Jojo Rabbit or Lighthouse?" And it was kind of a discussion about two indie movies, and then they went, "Where can I go?" No idea. They had no idea.
Yeah.
We're in Los Angeles. And they didn't know where to go see these two movies. One which might get nominated for Best Picture.
I mean, the landscape of film has just changed.
Yes.
And honestly, I don't know. I truly don't know if you put out a Godfather 4 today, do you get a kind of Terminator Dark Fate response where it's just like, like I truly don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, the face of film, the face of the way we consume content and what we're consuming has changed. And I think part of it too is just like this, not to brag on the MCU, because again, I look around my room. I love the MCU.
Yeah,
but
same.
I do think it has changed the way that a lot of people take in stories, where it's very canonical and very like, okay, if this then that, rather than emotions and feelings and how did this movie make you feel.
Well, I think to me a good example, and I was talking with Hector Navarro, a friend of ours. I was talking with him about, and again, this is not talking out of turn. Everyone, I think it was fairly well talked about that Kevin Feige had wanted Spider-Man to wait a year.
Right.
This is before all the, they're not doing it, now they're doing it, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Feige wanted Endgame to be the last movie of the year. And then Spider-Man come out in 2020. Sony was like, nope. And I was talking to Hector about it, and I said, I think he was right. Because how great was Endgame, the death of Tony Stark and all this other stuff? It's November. No one's talking about it. No one cares.
Yeah.
Because we've moved on to the next season. We're already on Spider-Man. Tony Stark might be in Black Widow, or he might not be on Black Widow, this, that, and the other. And now here's the shows. And I said, we don't let anything land.
Yeah.
And stick. Mm-hmm. And I said, it's like a great season finale of a TV show. If you had a season finale and you were like, oh my God. I said, imagine if Game of Thrones season 1, whatever I think of the last season, couple seasons. Season 1 ends, Ned Stark's dead. Oh my God. Oh, season 2 starts a month later.
Yeah.
No one's talking about season 1. No one's going to be like, my God, what do you think? Blah, blah, blah. We had moved right along. And that's not blaming Kevin Feige or Disney or any of that stuff, but it is a world where I feel like we don't let things sit.
Yeah.
We don't let like moments in film. And that's the stuff I enjoy about like art and cinema and all these other things, is to be able to have that conversation of like, my God, what do you think this story moment went? What do you think this plot moment meant? And I feel like I really loved Endgame. I feel like most of the discussion around Endgame was, is it going to take down Avatar?
Right.
And I was like, man, and I get it. I get that that's the business and that's interesting and that's clicks. But there's a part of me that's like, man, I just want to talk about the movie. We talking about the movie?
Right. I hear you. And I think, just to tie it all back around, that's kind of the interesting thing about Godfather Part 3 is that it waited. It let those first two sit for a long time. And then it's like, again, cynically it was for money, but it at a certain point, it's like once you cash the check, you still have to
You still
sit
got to
down.
do it.
You still got to do
Making
it.
a movie is not easy.
You still have to. It's not like he's like, all right, just put out what. Like clearly, there's a lot of plot in this,
Yes.
but it does feel like we got to sit with these characters, and I do appreciate that this was in a time before, we just consumed media differently, and I hope that if you have not seen The Godfather, wow, you made it really long into this episode for a trilogy you haven't seen. But if you have watched 1 and 2 and you just heard 3 was terrible, give it a shot. at least you'll know how it all wrapped up. You can draw your own conclusions, and you can draw your own conclusions about this show and go back to iTunes and rate and review so that we can knock out the economics podcast. I know we could do it together. Thank you so much, Cameron Rice.
Thank you.
Where it's Jurassic Gale?
Oh no! After the TV show, I had to make that stuff more official. I had
Oh
to be
no!
like,
Now
oh boy,
the Hotmail is gone.
yeah, Hotmail's gone, man. No, so Twitter is at the Cameron Rice, CameronRice.
Yeah, follow him there. El Rey Network, all the fun stuff you guys do over there with Vanessa Gritton and Hector, and yeah, just fun, good times, fun conversation still coming up. We've got some really hot, juicy, spicy things. If you thought last week's episode was too hot to handle, talking Ghostbusters with Emma Fyffe, we are going to close out season 2 of this show with Joseph Scrimshaw and I finally having the last Jedi conversation.
Oh no!
That is coming, Joseph, over at the Force Center podcast. He's going to do some Star Wars counseling because that's what he does. It's going to be a fun time. Thank you guys so much for listening, and one way or another, I will see you guys next week.